Now for the reason we're all here, I am so excited to welcome our opening speaker, Karolina Sarek. Karolina is the co-founder and co-executive director of Charity Entrepreneurship, where she is responsible for setting the overall strategy and ensuring the delivery of key programs across multiple departments. She also trains and mentors incubation program participants and alumni who are launching high-impact charities. Furthermore, Karolina serves as a fund manager at the Effective Altruism Animal Welfare Fund and as a board member and advisor for various nonprofits and think tanks. Prior to Charity Entrepreneurship, she co-founded an organization working on improving the impact of nonprofits and social enterprises, worked in measurement and evaluation, and conducted research at for-profit companies such as IBM, nonprofits, and in academia, all while still being a student. At the age of 22, she became a university teaching fellow, lecturing at the Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Science at Poland's top-ranked university. After that, she decided that she could have more impact outside academia and pivoted to work full-time in the nonprofit space. She has been engaged in effective altruism since 2015, so please join me in welcoming Karolina.
A lot of metaphors have been used to describe effective altruism. The one that particularly stuck with me was the metaphor of a boat, with some people rowing, some people steering, and other people arguing whether we should be rowing more or steering more. But maybe more recently, it felt to some of us that we are going through a storm, with some people bailing the water, other people repairing the hulls, and maybe even some thinking about taking a lifeboat and leaving the ship altogether. I think we're all pretty confident about direction. Maybe we had some doubts about how to get there. And I think that's very fair. I think charity entrepreneurship is just a small boat next to the whole EA movement as a whole. Maybe a frugal one, maybe a tugboat, in fact. But we have been pulling our weight above our weight in some ways. And I think it's because for some of the biggest questions that we have as people in the effective altruism movement, we thought independently about what trade-offs and should we be taking, how to answer those questions. So with this talk, I want to address those three, I think one of the three biggest questions we have, and tell you a little bit more about what I've learned by trying to answer them and balance those different trade-offs we have. So the first question is, how can we prioritize but stay modest? And I want to say that I don't have perfect answers to those questions. In fact, I think those are healthy questions we should keep answering and actually never stop asking this question, even when we feel we have the answer to it. And with this one particularly, on the one hand, of course, prioritization is a fundamental aspect of effective altruism. It's kind of very basic idea of how to do the most good. It requires us to prioritize, to answer this question of what is the most good thing. On the other hand, the field of prioritizing doing good is still very, very young, and we are still learning and we are still changing. We do not have all the answers. In fact, we should expect that new causes, new career paths, and ways of doing good will emerge or be uncovered. Just think about how many different paths and different careers we think right now are most promising have been like this 10 years ago. Here's just a screenshot from 80,000 Hours website now and 10 years ago. You could see that the pathways are quite different. Some of the things that lead to differences in prioritization are deep ethical and epistemic conundrums that might not be solved at our lifetime, or people just simply disagree about. There are people in this room who still think that those priorities that were on the list in 2023 are those that we still should have this year. So when CE was facing this conundrum between prioritization and modesty, what heuristic have we developed as a result of testing different answers to those questions? First of all, we observed that it's nearly impossible to identify the very best, but there are clear tiers of impact. What I mean by that is that when people ask me, which charity entrepreneurship charity is the best one? You started 30 of them. I'm sure you have favorites. I tell them, I don't know. But seriously, which one is the best one? You can tell me. I won't tell anyone. Which one is the best one? I say, I don't know. It could be Leap. Because within 3 months from starting, they already passed a regulation in the first country they work, banning usage of leaded paint that is poisonous for children. And they did that. And that work within 3 months by itself protected over 200,000 children from suffering health, cognitive, and income consequences. And they did that at the cost effectiveness of $14 per DALI. That's about 60 times more than give directly. Or it could be Shrimp Welfare Project, because even though they work on one of the most neglected and the least charismatic animals, even though I might disagree when you look at this guy, I think they made enormous progress. And just within the 2 years since they started, they already managed to convince some producers and companies to improve the welfare of those animals. And if all of the commitments they got will be implemented in the future, that will protect 2.5 billion shrimps. So, and even if you don't think shrimps are, as important as other species, even if you count their moral weight at 0.031, it's a tiny number compared to humans, as research from Briefing Priorities may suggest, it still trumps Leap's impact by affecting 200 times more morally weight-adjusted individuals. So when you ask me which charity is the best one, I'll tell you, I don't know. It depends on your values, how much you value shrimps versus other animals. It depends on your epistemology. How do we even know which ones is the best? And about your optimism about projections of this progress in the future. So fundamentally, this question is hard to answer. We might actually never know which is the very best options. CE, just because we think that shrimps are important to work on, CE shouldn't be all about shrimpact. And so the first principle we develop is that it's nearly impossible to identify the very best, but we can think in tiers of impact. And I think both of those organizations are in the top tier. And there are many of them as well that would be in this category. So even if I could map out all of that in theory, crunch my numbers, check all the assumptions, all of this, and have some sort of answer, expected value of different charities, still, I might have the number and have all the empirical facts right, but again, I will be still uncertain about how much to prioritize and balance between different species, different interventions, different causes, and so on and so forth. And that's because of those kind of underlying uncertainties about morals and epistemology. And the same applies to charities, to interventions, co-founders, which is your favorite one? I don't know. And career paths, and to many, many other areas that we work within. So when we prioritize, we want to stay modest. And instead of talking about single best options, we want to talk in tiers of impact. Second heuristic I have is that there is a place for both plural and for the prioritized. So as I mentioned, Shrimp Welfare Project is just about shrimp. That's all they do, that's the whole deal. But charity entrepreneurship is a plural organization. We work across many cause areas, in global health development, in animal advocacy, but also causes less common, like mental health or family planning. But also this year we'll be working in biosecurity space. So it's not just the moral, epistemic, and empirical uncertainty that pushes us toward modesty, although this is a central thing. There are other reasons as well. For example, limiting factor. That's something when we think about charities, that's a very important part of our consideration. And the general idea here is that, let's assume that I think animal advocacy is the most important cause ever, maybe even shrimps is the most important cause ever within that. I still won't be able to start 20 charities per year just focusing on Shrimp Act. It's just not going to be possible because they will be limited by number of people who care enough about shrimps to work at those organizations, number of funders that want to fund organizations working on those issues, and other factors like this. So even though I could start, I might want to start 20 shrimp charities, in fact, I'll be only able probably to start one. And because that's kind of like the limiting factor. So then we might not be able to reach the whole scale of the problem if something will stop us before that. So instead of looking just at the scale of the problem, although that's of course a very important factor, we also look at what could limit us to reach that full scale. And therefore pushes us toward starting organizations across in different spaces. The second thing we've learned is that there's a lot of cross-cause learning that is possible because we are a plural community. On the one hand, animal advocacy movement can learn a lot from global health and development, particularly in the space of monitoring and evaluation. But I also think global health and development can learn a lot from animal advocacy movements. This kind of like ambitious, audacious, let's change the whole thing spirit that animal movement have that I absolutely love. I think we could use a little more of that ambition in the global health and development space as well. So I think there's just a lot of cross-cause learning. I think it also enables us to stay open more to cause X. In a way, we built our team to be able to move from cause to cause. Our research team doesn't have specialists in this cause, specialists in that cause. We may have one expert. However, our research team specializes in being generalist. They know how to move from a cause to cause and conduct research in many spaces, switching year to year. And that's just some like systemic thing we decided to do to make it easier for us to explore cause X's, explore causes that we haven't looked into before. And I think if we build the structure that enables us to do it, it's just much more likely to happen. So I think that's kind of sometimes why we look into causes that are not as prioritized in the effective altruism movement. And I want to continue doing that because, again, I don't think we have all the answers. And I think it's worth exploring more. And lastly, I think leads to better talent utilization. I might find a lot of entrepreneurs who are super competent, they're in the corporate world or something like this. And for some reason, I try to convince them of shrimps and they're not biting it. So that would be really a shame to lose someone who is extremely talented and extremely entrepreneurial, could do really, really great things, and lose that person to a corporate world just because they don't care about this particular species. So just by having more causes, more organizations, more people we can utilize and let to having and show them the direction of how they can have more impact. Those are not the central arguments why I think we should be modest, but I think they are just nice to haves. The second and the third lesson or heuristic we developed throughout is that there's a difference between highest priority in theory, highest priority in practice, and therefore highest priority overall. Let me come back to shrimps one last time. This one will be about the last stage of their life and the stunning before slaughter. So when both we and Shrimp Welfare Project looked into different interventions about what to do to improve shrimp welfare, they looked into different methods of stunning. And they looked into academic literature and scientific studies and theoretical and kind of created the theoretical priorities. Okay, the best way to stun a shrimp that is most humane is through something called ice slurry, which what it means in short is that you immerse shrimps in ice cold water and ice, so they're stunned very quickly. And that's the most humane method. It doesn't sound like sensible to us with our biology, but for shrimp biology, it kind of works. And they were, okay, that seemed to be our priority number one. Let's just implemented this thing globally. Sounds great. Until they hit the ground, actually visited countries where they work. So Vietnam, India, Ecuador. And they noticed that it's not how it works in practice. So instead of immersing shrimps in ice and ice cold water, people are just like stacking the crates with them and just like throwing some ice on top and calling it a day. It doesn't really work. So what in theory is the most effective thing, in practice, when they saw the reality of things, didn't rise to the top, even though the scientific literature can tell us anything about that. But the reality really is the ultimate checking points for us. So they changed the priority. They decided not to pursue this intervention, even though it looked the best from expected value calculations and based on scientific literature. So it's very important to kind of differentiate those two and making sure that they create your priorities in connection with reality. Now the second question. How can we be ambitiously altruistic without succumbing to the risk of ambition. Another big challenge, another question that I think is quite hard to answer. And again, I don't have answers, but we have developed some heuristics. First, set up moral guardrails. Those are moral principles that stop you from taking actions that might look good from many perspectives, but there's important moral perspective that disagrees with it. A couple of ideas how it could look like. For example, LEAP, Elect Exposure Elimination Project, looks good from multiple perspectives. Both you look at it from consequentialist perspective, looking at the health outcomes, or later life income, as that affects IQ and therefore later life income as well. And therefore education. It looks pretty good from rights-based perspective because it enables people to have a healthy start from the very beginning. It also looks good from a perspective of economic empowerment and empowerment in general, just because it unlocks more life choices. So when figuring it out, those moral guardrails, don't just think about philosophical considerations. Again, I'm not a philosopher, I'm a practitioner. So those advice are just practical advice, not philosophical statements. And I think, again, we have to confront them in reality. So even when you're considering moral questions, try to go outside your own head. Try to go check it with reality. For example, conducting revealed and stated preferences studies of beneficiaries that you are hoping to affect, seeing what moral weights they have. I'll speak a little bit about that later. And lastly, play it safe by avoiding any action that looks really bad from an important point of view. And remember, don't just do something that seems right for the greater good. You're probably missing something. Okay. When we talk about long-tail distribution of impact, we are used to seeing this picture. But where there's a chance to produce an enormous amount of good, there's also a chance to produce enormous amount of harm. And this is often the unseen part of the distribution. On one side, we have earn billions and donate to top charities. On the other side, we have commit fraud, harm customers, and affect morals and reputation of the whole movement. On the one side, we have studying novel viruses to better respond to pandemic if it happens. On the other side, we have accidental lab leak leading to this pandemic. On one side, we might have investing on a massive scale in a talent focused on nuclear security policy in India, affecting equilibrium between big power conflicts. Or geoengineering to counter climate change, leading to famine and starvation on the other side. We don't know what those things could be, nor we know what probability there is that they will happen or we will cause them. But I think it's not a negligible factor, and we should be thinking, as much as we think about the long-tail distribution of positive impact, we should be also thinking about the other side of the distribution. And that leads me to the next principle. The larger the effect you're aiming to have, even the positive, the more caution and vetting should go into deciding whether you want to pursue this action. And again, I stress again the even positive aspect, because the world is really, really complex and really uncertain, and it would be very easy for us to miss a very important considerations that will lead to unpredictable consequences. Economics is like full of cases where externalities of given intervention led to harming the beneficiaries we aimed to help in the first place. Another heuristic I have that helps us not to get into the other side of the distribution is to pursue either revolutionary idea or revolutionary action, and not combining the two. Let me give you an example. So we have two axes here. On one hand, you see an idea, either moderate or revolutionary. And on the other hand, you see action, either moderate or revolutionary. Here we have an overlap between a moderate idea and moderate action. That's kind of the space of traditional philanthropy or in charity. You know, doing good, but maybe not like pushing the moral progress, which we aim here. Here is the risk area, where we have the revolutionary idea, maybe a new or contrarian one, and revolutionary action. Given we might be uncertain about this idea, or it might be wrong, if we pursue really revolutionary actions, there's always this chance that we'll be on the other side of the long tail distribution. And there are just spaces that still really push moral progress in many important ways, but seem to be much more safe, like those two areas. So for example, again, shrimp welfare project, kind of revolutionary, crazy idea. Shrimp are sentient, they matter morally, we should be doing something about it. Not very common thing. But the action they are taking to improve their welfare is pretty moderate. We talk to producers, talk to companies, tell them to increase the welfare and change the practices. Simple, easy, they shake hands and it's done. On the other hand, we have an idea that is very, very simple. Let's not poison the kids, okay? But the action is quite revolutionary. We are really pushing it. Let's ban the whole thing globally ASAP. And that's fine, okay, as well, just because the idea is very intuitive and very moderate. And I think this way we can kind of balance the ambition with reducing the risks as well. Okay, last point with our ambition. Let's set opportunities to falsify our beliefs and course correct as soon as possible. So let's just have a quick look at the graph here. So we have the line that tells us the right direction. Ideally, we follow a straight line from here to there. Just go in a straight line. That's the most efficient, best way to get us to the place of the most impact. And that's where we walk. What happens if you don't have those opportunities to check your claims, if you don't have those feedback loops or checkpoints, you might be going off course for a long time before you hit something or before something happens that rings a red alarm and tells you, go back, go back, go back, go back. And then what do you do? Well, you see the red alarm, you come back, and you fly in the other direction. And then you're off course again. You overcompensated because you don't have something to protect to let you know that you're off course for a long time. And that could be happening at all times. What we don't want to do is be closer to this green line. Have small, careful, timely updates at the right time that will get us back on course. So how do we do it? First of all, set up feedback loops and monitor closely at each stage. You can do it by starting with drawing a theory of change, how your theory, how you'll get from where you are to having an impact, starting with what you're going to do, what's going to happen as a consequence of that, what's going to be the outcomes of it, and how those outcomes will lead to impact. This is just for you to understand how you see this thing, your actions of yours leading to impact. But don't just stop at this point. Equally important as drawing the theory of change is drawing all the assumptions you're taking, how this thing will lead to another thing. Because those assumptions could be hidden things you might take for granted that you rely on, that if they don't actually check with reality, if they're not right, will either lead you to not having an impact because your whole chain is going to collapse, or they will hide something that could, for example, lead to downside risks. When you're constructing the theory of change and assumptions, mark, maybe with colors, maybe with words, whatever it is, mark which ones are the most uncertain one, and if they're not played out the way you think they're playing out in the reality, what would be the consequence? So kind of the magnitude of the impact of those assumptions or importance of those assumptions. And when you're thinking about taking an action, just check those assumptions first. We even recommend to our charities when they start is as a, your first goal as a charity is, kill your own idea. And we hand them the theory of change with all the assumptions and say, okay, here are the biggest assumptions, check it before. So they go and they try to kill the idea. And that just really, not only is, I think, it's a very important step, but really very empowering step. Because after you check those assumptions very well, you can be more confident in your idea and pursue it with more motivation for action. And also, you'll know at what points your intervention could go wrong. So when you set up your monitoring and evaluation, your feedback loops, your checkpoints, you'll know what would be the most fragile places where it can go wrong. So you can be much more vigilant for those as you're implementing intervention as well. For example, the first thing that LEAP did when they came to go to a country is conduct paint studies to really check whether lead is actually in paints, because the literature had some gaps about it. So they did, and it showed enormous amount of lead, and it was just shocking. I was with them when they received the results from the lab. It was just insane. It was both terrifying and also exciting. Okay, we have this thing, we can do something about it. And now conducting pain studies is something that they do in every country they work in, because that's the very first step they have to do. And the last question I have for us is, how can we update but prevent radical swings when we're updating? So kind of we are not going this swinging from left to right as we saw on a previous graph. First, don't rely just on one method. When we conduct our research, we check multiple criteria that an idea have to pass in order to go to the next round. If, for example, we only used cost-effectiveness analysis or expected value calculations to determine which charity is the best one, we often seen that an idea looks incredibly good on like CEA, so cost-effectiveness analysis, and it's just like, okay, this is going to be a clear winner. We're definitely going to recommend this thing at the end of the process. But then we, for example, check the evidence, and that's starting to look more shaky. And when you start discounting the expected value calculation for the evidence that this action will actually produce this value, the CEA regresses quite a bit. And I think it's very important that when we make decisions, we use those multi-tool decision making. When we look at the problem or the question from multiple independent perspectives, seeing whether they converge and combining them together, so we are less reliant on one method that is more likely to be wrong and therefore lead us to swing back again. Another thing we developed is this idea to keep investing in the basic and reliable ways of doing good and experimenting on the margin. So of course, we want to have the most impact. We already found out lots of good opportunities to do it. But of course, we want to explore new causes as well and new areas of doing good. So we want to experiment. But if we found something new and then dropped everything else we found out before and just went to pursue that, again, CE will end up being all about shrimpact. We don't want that because, maybe shrimps actually don't end up being the most morally important problem ever. We don't know that. So that's why we decided to keep investing in the basic and good ways of doing good. So the way we do it is, for example, we have some causes that we always conduct research and start charities in. That's like animal advocacy, then global health and poverty. And there are some ways where every year we add a new cause area to the mix, that cause area we've never done before. And that way, every year we have an experiment with a new cause area, with new charities, and we can see how our theory checks in with reality after they launch, and we can validate, oh, was it a good idea? Are they having the impact we hoped them to have? So this way we can kind of like balance both the basic ways of doing good and reliable ways of doing good with the experimentation on the margin. And the last point is about differing less on subjective questions and a little bit more about areas pertaining to objective reality. So I mentioned moral weights of beneficiaries seconds ago. Here is results from a study conducted by ID Insight among beneficiaries of programs run by GiveWell top charities. Here are respondents' information about what value they put on particular outcomes, in this case, life of a young child. The navy blue, dark navy blue color is the value that beneficiaries in the ID Insight study put on preventing death of a child under 5 years old. That's on the left, and then on the right, what value they put on preventing the lives of people over 5 years old. The gray graph is, or the gray bars, is the extrapolation from high-income countries data. So asking people in high-income countries what value you place and kind of extrapolating that to other populations. It's quite a different number. And the last blue one is the value that GiveWell staff put on those outcomes. So not only you see that they're decreasing, but also that the value that different people put on preventing death of a child versus of a person above 5 years old is very different. How different they are. It just really shows that this subjective questions of how you value life is something that people have widely different views about. So if I were to just defer to random population of high-income countries people, probably I'll be undervaluing how much people who are actual beneficiaries valuing their own life. or life of the other people they have around them. On the other hand, when I'm conducting a study, I better not invent it from scratch or ask beneficiaries, hey, how can I ask you about this? But rather actually check with the monitoring and evaluation specialist to tell me about how to run rigorous study. And that's kind of the areas of pertaining to real domain expertise that I think we can differ much more on, and I think we should be differing a lot too. There's so much more I could say. I think those 3 questions are some of the biggest ones we might be facing at charity entrepreneurship, but also in effective altruism. And I think those questions represent like a real healthy tensions, tensions that we should be balancing and answering these questions. And how we resolve them determine the shape of our action and the impact we're going to have. But at the end of the day, how to get to the place of the most impact is an open question that will likely never be settled. Whether we get there on a sailing line or a tugboat or kayaking our way, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the destination, the impact we have. And that journey is fueled by this basic instinct of helping the most people I can is just the coolest and the most important thing ever, and I want to do it. When I look at the smile of my friends when they're at their happiest, and I think, I want this for everyone, regardless of the species. When I see a child playing outside and having fun in the sun, I know I want that for everyone as well. And just that feeling, I think, have been fueling me for sure over the last year and over the last 5 years since starting charity entrepreneurship. And I don't want to be prescriptive. I don't want to tell you what to do or what to think. But I do have one request. Throughout this conference, as you're having your one-on-ones, watching talks, talking at meetups, reflect on this inner instinct you have, this inner motivation, this inner voice that you have. Because I think we share it all. We all share the same thing. Doing the most good is the coolest thing, the most important thing ever, and I want to do it. So please don't forget about it, reflect on it, and lean into it and let it fuel you. And with this, I want to welcome you at the Effective Altruism Global London 2023.